All right, we are 1 minute past the hour. I know folks are going to keep trickling in here, but we're going to go ahead and get started. Aloha mai kako. Thank you for joining today's webinar hosted by REL Pacific, Assessment Systems in Indigenous Contexts. We have a wide range of time zones and locations across the US and the Pacific region represented here today. We know many of you are members of Native communities or may work closely with Native communities. If you would like to, please share a greeting from the place you're joining us from or the community that you're representing in the chat. We would love to see the diversity of places and languages represented here in the audience today. Right, from our presenter panel alone, we have representatives from located currently in Honolulu, in Hilo on the Big Island, Bismarck, North Dakota, and in California. So I know we have that wide representation in our audience as well. All right, Kano, if you could go to the next slide. To start, just here are a few housekeeping things, some helpful tips for using Zoom. If you ever can't hear the audio, use your phone to call the number on the screen. You can make a note of it just in case if you feel like you might lose connection at some point. When you do post in the chat, make sure to send to all panelists and attendees. This will allow others to see your questions and comments for a more interactive chat conversation. Closed captions are available from the Zoom menu at the bottom of your screen. And if you have any technical questions at all, please tag Betsy Calloway in the chat. We'll do our best to support you in any way we can. Please note that we are recording this webinar and the slides and the recording will be uploaded to the IES website following this webinar. We'll also email these links to everyone who registered. So keep an eye out for an email from relpacific.org. Right. I'm going to introduce myself and our panelists now. My name is Katie Gao. I am the partnerships lead for REL Pacific at McREL International. It is my honor to introduce our panel here today. Our guest presenters are all educators and leaders, and they bring to this discussion a great deal of experience and knowledge from different systems perspectives. I'll have each of them just share a brief introduction of themselves and the perspective that they bring to this webinar. So Dr. Nelson-Barber is the Director of the Culture and Language in STEM Education at WestEd.
Thank you, Katie. Wingapo chama, aloha kako, and welcome everyone. My name is Sharon Nelson-Barber, and I'm calling in from the homelands of the Kalapuya, where I live as a visitor. These lands are also known as Portland, Oregon. I also want to acknowledge the original peoples of everyone here in attendance. My family recently moved to Oregon because honestly, my husband loves to fish and we live along the Willamette River. We have two grown daughters. One's a special ed teacher in Oregon and the other's a filmmaker in Los Angeles. As Katie said, I'm directing culture and language and STEM education at WestEd, which is a sister organization of McREL. I have lifelong personal and professional experience in Indigenous communities. My interest in STEM began early on when I accompanied my father and my grandfather while subsistence hunting and fishing. And that's when I started to understand the extent to which science and math was implicit in daily traditional activities. So now I work side by side with other Indigenous researchers and community partners in Indian country, in Alaska, Micronesia, parts of Polynesia. My work connects school learning with students' own lived experiences and cultural ways of knowing, and this extends to cultural influences on educational assessment and testing. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Nelson-Barber. Next, we have Lucy Fredericks, the Director of Indian and Multicultural Education at the North Dakota Department of Public Instruction. Could you introduce yourself and your team, please?
Sure. Thank you, Katie. Hello, everyone. As Katie mentioned, my name is Lucy Fredericks, and I'm the Director in the Office of Indian Multicultural for the North Dakota Department of Public Instruction. So of course I oversee Indian education along with Title III, our EL program, and we also have a summer migrant program in North Dakota here. And I've been with the department for over 10 years now. Prior to that, I've been in education since 1990, so quite a few years. I am an enrolled member of the Standing Rock Sioux tribe in Fort Yates, North Dakota, and I live in Mandan, Bismarck, Mandan, North Dakota. So with that, I'd also like to introduce our partners, Dr. Scott Simpson and Sharla Steever, who are learning specialists from Technology and Innovation in Education out of Rapid City, South Dakota. And so they'll talk a little bit more later on, and we are here to provide some examples and some of the work that we're doing here at the state level and the district level at the North Dakota Department of Public Instruction. Thank you.
Thank you. Finally, we have joining us representing the school level perspective, Kameha Ililani Waiau, the Hope Kahu principal of Kekula o Samuel Kamakau.
Ui, aloha kako. My name is Kameha Ililani Waiau. I'm the oldest daughter of Clifford and Eileen Waiau, and the oldest granddaughter of Samuel and Phyllis Wright. And we are 5 generations from Papakolea Oahu, which is not the mokupuni I'm currently on. I am on Moku Keawe enjoying spring break here in the uplands of Waiakeauka, above Hilo area, safe from the volcano, in case anybody is we call about that. I am blessed and honored to serve as the Hopekahu as the principal of Kekula o Samuel Manaya Kalani Kamakau Laboratory Public Charter School, because you know all Indigenous school names need to be that long. And I'm gonna share some about just some of the good works we've been doing at our little kula that could potentially serve as a model for other kula and other small Indigenous community schools. Aloha kako.
Mahalo. Before I pass this over to our presenters for what they're going to share with us, I'd like to provide a high-level introduction to the Regional Educational Laboratory Program. There are 10 RELs across the U.S. and the U.S.-affiliated Pacific region that are funded by the Institute of Education Sciences, which is the research arm of the U.S. Department of Education. As part of IES, the RELs are nonpartisan and independent. Each REL partners and collaborates with their local school districts, state departments of education, policymakers, and other education stakeholders to help systems put education research into action. Through this, the RELs conduct applied research and provide training and coaching to educators and system leaders seeking to use research in ways that help improve learner outcomes. And today's webinar is being hosted by REL Pacific. REL Pacific serves educators and school systems that are spread across 5 million square miles of the Pacific Ocean, including the state of Hawaii, the U.S. territories of American Samoa, Guam, and the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands, and the island nations of the Federated States of Micronesia, the Republic of the Marshall Islands, and the Republic of Palau. Our work currently focuses on high priority areas identified by the school systems we serve, which currently are teacher effectiveness, math and literacy instruction, and culturally responsive teaching and learning. This webinar in particular was conceived out of the work with our partnership with the Hui for All to benefit from Hawaiian education. The organizational and school partners involved in this Hui are engaged in critical action research around high quality, culturally responsive, and culturally sustaining instruction and assessment in Hawaii public charter schools. If you would like to learn more about the work of the Hui or REL Pacific in general, please visit the REL Pacific website. Here are our learning goals for the webinar today. In taking a systems view of culturally responsive assessment, we will learn about the state of the field related to assessment in Indigenous contexts and assessment of Indigenous students. We'll discuss considerations and challenges for making assessment systems culturally responsive for Indigenous students at different levels of the education system. And we'll learn about how frameworks of Indigenous cultural understandings in Hawaii and North Dakota are informed by and are informing conversations around assessment systems. To queue up for Dr. Nelson-Barber's presentation, we're going to share a poll right now to gauge where the audience is at in your interest in this topic. So please select all that may apply here. We'll leave this open for just a few moments. All right, the responses are coming in. The options are educators, decision-making role, consulting, technical assistance, general interest. If other and you would like to enter that into the chat, feel free to do so. This chat is open for anyone to add at any time. The webinar today is scheduled for an hour and a half to allow for a Q&A session following the presentations. So we encourage you to add your questions to the chat as they come up so that we can collect those as we go along. All right, let's share the results. We have a pretty good variety of those joining us today. And it looks like a lot of folks are in supporting roles working with systems and educators on their assessment systems. So thank you for joining us today. All right, and with that, I am pleased to pass this to Dr. Nelson-Barber to set the context of Indigenous student assessment in the United States.
Well, thank you so much. We're so excited to have so many of you here today, and we appreciate your high interest in this topic, and I'm really impressed with the range of places that people are from. I just saw a message from Central America, which I wasn't expecting to see, so it's just wonderful. I'm honored to set the context for the fine work you're going to hear about today. As you know, the focus will be on K-12 assessment in Indigenous U.S. context. Indigenous meaning Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, American Indian, and Alaska Native classrooms. I'll begin with a brief overview of some of my experiences, and then you'll hear the firsthand accounts of the panelists from North Dakota and from right here in Hawaii as in the Kamakau Laboratory Public Charter School here. So next slide. As we all know, these are turbulent and challenging times that have shifted our ways of living. There's a reckoning about race, equity, and social and environmental justice, along with an enduring public health crisis. This is arguably a point in time to reflect and refocus. It's surely a point in time to amplify multiple voices, knowledges, and experiences to confront history and move to a newly conceptualized future. The field is asking for bold innovations to advance racial equity. It also asks that the voices, knowledges, and experiences of diverse communities become visible in the work we do. Indigenous peoples deeply understand the importance of confronting history, and Indigenous narratives can be emblematic of moves toward systemic change. Next slide. Now, many of you may be familiar with this cartoon, School Begins. If not, notice in the front row, newly colonized territories of Hawaii, the Philippines, Puerto Rico, and Cuba. In the back row are California, Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. Caricatures of American Indians, African Americans, and Asian Americans are shown as well, but off to the side, excluded from the schooling process. Although this cartoon depicts the conventional intent at the time, that the United States had a moral duty to colonize, develop, and modernize the world's peoples of color, educational improvement has not been the obvious result. For Indigenous students, numerous reforms implemented over many generations have proven to be not only ineffective, but also counterproductive for Indigenous students' educational achievement and social well-being. Next slide. Those of you attending from the Pacific are familiar with the level of colonization imposed in the region. Entities in Polynesia have their own stories, but in the case of Guam and other parts of Micronesia, colonization began with Magellan, then Germany, then Japan, then the US, all with different purposes, levels of aggression, and erasure of heritage languages and cultures. This 1912 photo from Guam magazine illustrates the paternalistic stance of the time and much more, as you can see. The photo kind of speaks for itself. Moving to the right to the 2000s in this photo of a school in the Republic of the Marshall Islands taken during the era of No Child Left Behind, which was the reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act that governs K-12 U.S. public education policy. This federal law was adamant about high expectations and measurable goals to give every child a chance to improve their educational outcomes. States were to use proven educational practices based on research that met certain criteria as determined by the U.S. Department of Education. It called for highly qualified teachers to deliver standards-based instruction and assessment, accountability, and continuous improvement for all students, with special attention to English language learners. At the time, REL, which is another sister organization of McREL and has served the Pacific since the 1960s, reported concerns that shifting from bilingual education to learning in English was not a small change, especially since the suggested best practices were based on mainland research and not designed to accommodate island ways of knowing and doing that teachers had already incorporated in their teaching. So despite the intent to give every child the chance to improve, many approaches were jettisoned to adhere to assumptions and expectations of the Act, even though they did not align with the unique cultural ways of learning in the Indigenous Pacific. No Child Left Behind has since been replaced with the 2015 Every Student Succeeds Act, ESSA, which also demands quality education, but gives states more say in how schools account for student achievement. It creates conditions for better communication among schools and parents and communities. For example, American Indian communities now hold consultation meetings so that tribal education leaders, schools, parents, and communities are clear about needs and how they're being addressed. ESSA provides more flexibility on the testing requirements placed on public schools, but it still relies on testing to create accountability outcomes, which can be an unreliable way to measure the success or failure of a student. If we pay attention to what works for Indigenous students and not push universal standards and methods on teachers, today's classrooms can move away from a new kind of forced assimilation. But it's a delicate balance to recognize both strengths and needs, as well as a challenge for departments of education and national reform efforts to work with communities in constructive ways that are respectful of local assets and autonomy. Next slide. So why should we focus on Indigenous students? There are many factors that set Native students apart from other minoritized groups in the United States. Historical and cultural trauma, for one. Cross-generational trauma is well documented by research. That means genocide, punishment for use of the heritage language, separation from ancestral homelands and land-based practices, abuse in boarding schools, and so forth. These experiences continue to affect Indigenous systems, communities, and individuals. Another, sovereignty and self-determination. Unlike other minoritized groups in the US, tribes as sovereign nations have a distinct political relationship with the US government due to unique policies, practices, and trust responsibilities between Native nations and the US government. For American Indians, many are tied to the original treaties. For Alaska Natives, associated with their corporations, etc. Indigenous belief systems, knowledge bases, ways of being, and epistemologies are distinctly different from those of mainstream dominant society. This means that individuals are socialized with assumptions and expectations unique from conventional American life ways. Environment and place. Indigenous peoples are deeply linked to the natural environment. For generations, they've developed systems of knowledge, cultural practices, and life ways that enable them to adapt to environmental change on the basis of observations and lived experience, which is very valuable knowledge in this time of climate crisis, as an example. Indigenous socialization. Best practices for majority culture schools do not readily translate to Indigenous cultural environments. Although the broad outlines of a reform may be deemed appropriate, the specifics of its design and implementation must be adapted to local context. In other words, Western education focuses on standardization. Indigenous communities focus on localization through flexible and consistent pedagogy that's fundamentally responsive to context. What confounds this is that the dominant culture shapes the face of education for all students in the US. And finally, language and cognition. Many Indigenous students find discontinuity between ways of communicating and interacting at home and in school. This mismatch can be amplified by current testing methods. The need for students to demonstrate knowledge in particular ways on formal testing can inhibit effective achievement for students as well as engagement of families in their children's schooling. Next slide. So what about movement toward culturally responsive education? Decades of research on learning and development shows that connecting school learning with students' own lived experiences, cultural ways of knowing, and perceptions can provide learners with opportunities to see the value of all aspects of their learning. They make personally meaningful connections between the relevant knowledge they gain throughout the course of their lives and knowledge that is important in school content areas. For instance, families who follow traditional subsistence lifestyles have deep understanding of ecological and economic science. They might use their environmental knowledge for wayfinding purposes, such as using star navigation to travel from island to island, or to cross the tundra for hunting or moving. If they're tending the watershed by minding their taro patches, they're engaged in design engineering. Although relevance has been an important theme in efforts to improve formal education and to broaden participation, what is relevant can look quite different and mean different things in distinct cultural communities. Often teachers don't recognize the richly specialized mathematics and science knowledge of their native students as mathematical or scientific because those understandings haven't been defined as mathematical or scientific in their experience as educators. Schooling must be responsive to community perspectives and socialization practices. This means that the field must be better informed about the cognitive strengths and competencies that all students develop in their own communities. Next slide. According to Gutierrez and Rogoff, each student's own repertoires of practice factor into the interpretive framework they use to approach test items. Conventional test design does not account for the influence of these factors, adopting instead to make tests as similar as possible across contexts as a means of ensuring their validity. But because the cultural factors do play a role in students' responses to test items, one artifact of conventional test design is that only a limited sample of student knowledge can be assessed when students must make bridges and translate to meet the test maker's assumptions. So we have to ask, how accurately do the instruments used for assessing academic performance reflect students' true knowledge base? First, we must recognize that tests and assessments are cultural artifacts and that the ways in which students respond to them are affected by their cultural knowledge and experience. It means accounting for students' cultural and linguistic backgrounds, epistemologies, educational experiences, communication styles, and socioeconomic situations in the processes of assessment development and implementation. These are precisely the issues that prompted my colleague, Guillermo Solano Flores, and I to propose cultural validity as a core component of test validity. Next slide. So now what I want to do is just give you briefly an example from some of our work that kind of that shows how conventional test design can be altered a bit to truly capture what students know. You'll see that on the left side, there are many elements: language, life experiences, community norms and values, etc. And it isn't to say that test makers don't understand this. Of course they do. They've been developing tests for a long time and making sure that things are as least biased as possible. But still, even with all of this taken into account, they really only capture just a little of students' knowledge as represented in this diagram. Next slide. So I want to show you an example of an item that was used in a high stakes assessment and the students' response to it. So the item was bacteria and laboratory animals are sometimes used by scientists as model organisms when researching cures for human diseases such as cancer. Describe one possible advantage and one possible disadvantage of using bacteria as models to help find cures for human diseases. The advantage, the student says, was that bacteria aren't like dogs and cats, so they're not supposed to be suffering, or at least we think that, but there's no way to know. And the disadvantage was we aren't like bacteria. The second question was describe one possible advantage and one possible disadvantage of using laboratory animals such as mice, guinea pigs, and monkeys as models to help find cures for human diseases. And the student said the advantage was closer to being humans, and the disadvantage was there is no such thing as laboratory animals. All animals are our brothers and sisters and our spiritual leaders, or spiritual teachers. We don't have the right to use or kill them unless it is for food. And what this is demonstrating, it was from an 8th grade Hawaiian student, that there is such a rich reservoir of knowledge that students bring based on their lived experience and everything that they've learned in schooling. There's so much that they bring to the context that can't be captured in a lot of the high stakes tests, particularly if it's a one response answer, fill in the blank, or multiple choice tests. And we believe that in some cases where kids are bringing different belief systems, different set of ethics and values, that it's really important to give them the opportunity to share what they know. Next slide. So what we attempted to do was to create, how could we help elicit that kind of information from students? So we sort of added additional features to this model by focusing on context richness, item content relevance, process emphasis. How could we bring in the lived experience and tap that, believing that it would assess a much larger reservoir of student knowledge? Next slide. And so when we altered the test, this is what happened. We changed it to say certain types of animals, bacteria, mice, rabbits, monkeys, are used by scientists as model organisms in experiments that help them to learn about the ways human diseases can be treated or cured. For example, a scientist studying treatment for diabetes might give a newly invented drug to a rabbit and measure closely what happens to the rabbit before testing that drug on a human. In the boxes below, list all the positive and negative things you see as possible outcomes from scientists using animals as model organisms in this way. And the student responded that the positive side was rabbits would die from bad drugs instead of humans. And the negative side, we must get bad karma from treating the animals as lower life forms from us. 2, using animals for research means that they are not out in the environment living happy lives, they're suffering in cages. 3, we shouldn't be trying to cure diabetes or cancer, we should be learning how to prevent it. That doesn't need animals. And 4, you could get in trouble if rabbit was your family guardian spirit and you heard it. The second question became, considering the information you listed above, write your perspective about whether or not animals should be used in scientific research. The student replied, I don't think animals should be used in scientific research because animals have just as much of a right to health and feeling good and not being in pain as we do. They aren't lesser than us and we aren't greater than them, so we don't have the right to use them. And so this is pointing out that you can give students opportunities to express themselves, to show what they know, and they can also answer the question. Sometimes our more high-level, high-stakes tests ask for a particular answer and don't have that latitude for students to respond. So this is, I have other things to say about this and how it's not cost effective to expect to do this for every student, but it's really pointing out the distinct differences when students have different belief systems and how we might respond to that. So let's see, next slide. So in culturally responsive assessment, it's essential to build on assets that exist. Psychologist and Yale professor emeritus Edmund Gordon has argued for developing assessment procedures that are a more appropriate reflection of the ways in which people think, learn, and work. Strategies likely to elicit valid information about Indigenous students' learning include building from communicative patterns already in place in the community. And here's some examples of how this could play out. Allowing choice and self-regulation. In other words, giving students the opportunity to make their own judgments about when and how to show what they've learned. 2, allowing students to help each other when possible. Students are socialized in collective and collaborative communities. How can we draw upon that, capitalize on that? 3, providing opportunities for modeling and demonstration, not just paper and pencil responses. 4, using visual input and supports, not just verbal ones, and providing opportunities for visual modes of expression and learning. 5, allowing for choral, in other words, whole group responses and other methods that do not target individuals for public response to questions. It's not just the tests themselves, but also the ways they affect the entire education process that must concern researchers and educators of Native students. Next slide. If we are to successfully move toward culturally responsive assessment practices in the classroom, then we must consider the following. Bring authentic experience to classroom learning by integrating cultural information in the conventional content being taught. Relationships are important. In Indigenous communities, they're especially important. Teachers have to develop strong relationships within the classroom and also with students' families. It's valuable for teachers to immerse themselves in local contexts, such as going to the local trading post in the community after school or attending a church service. Identify community cultural liaisons who can be invaluable in helping navigate the range of distinctive contours of culture. Next slide. To make a difference at the classroom level, we must work at the system level. Northwest University's Professor Emerita Carol Lee calls for a dynamic view of human learning and development rooted in both human biology and culture. She reminds us that opportunities to learn occur in the complex ecologies of people's lives. That is, in aspects of learning that have gone unrecognized, such as relationships, contexts, languages, and tools and practices based on community knowledge. The assessment research stories you'll hear next exemplify the repertoires of practice that people develop in routine settings of their lives that can be recruited to support complex learning and assessment, and that educational settings can be designed to address. By incorporating a diversity of knowledges and intellectual traditions from the start, a broader spectrum of approaches and solutions can be generated to actively address assessment issues in ways that will far outweigh the consequences of inaction or of the limited scope that any one tradition can provide. Next slide. We'll now transition to our panelists who represent different contexts, but are both working toward providing teaching and learning opportunities that better reflect and support Indigenous students. They'll share experiences from their own perspectives and contexts, working within and stretching their education systems. It's our hope that by hearing these experiences, you'll be able to see how educators working at any level of the education ecosystem can positively affect Indigenous students' education experiences. Next slide.
Thank you, Sharon and Katie. So I'm just going to talk a little bit, kind of give a brief introduction of some of the information to set the context for the work that we're doing at the North Dakota Department of Public Instruction. So, and then I will turn it over to our partners, Dr. Scott Simpson and Sharla Steever. But the first thing I want to mention is that the Office of Indian Education at the Department of Public Instruction was created in 2012. And it was an office that was a priority for our state superintendent, Kirsten Baszler. And to give you a little information about the state, we have approximately over 14,000 Native American students that are enrolled in our K-12 system in North Dakota. And so that equals about almost 11% of the K-12 enrollment in North Dakota. That is the highest minority population in the state. Next slide, please. And so the office is created in 2012, and that's actually when I started in the position, and with a priority and a focus on Native American education and culturally responsive practices in North Dakota. Next slide. So one of the first projects that we started in North Dakota was called the North Dakota Native American Essential Understandings Project. And it started in the spring of 2015, and where we brought elders together from the 5 tribes in North Dakota. And those 5 tribal nations are the Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara Nation, which is also known as the 3 affiliated tribes, the Spirit Lake Tribe, and the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe, the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa, and the Sisseton Wahpeton Oyate. So those are the 5 federally recognized tribes in North Dakota, which with over 36,000 members, which makes up about 5 to 7% of the state's population. So we brought these elders together, had several gatherings. They shared their wisdom, their storytelling, their language, their culture. And really, they were the ones who developed the 7 essential understandings. So this is what they wanted students in North Dakota to know about Native American tribes in North Dakota. And so that began the process of developing the North Dakota Native American Essential Understandings Project. So just a short introduction about that. And we partnered at the state level with TIE, who is Dr. Scott Simpson and Sharla Steever, who've had a lot of experience working with states in developing these types of essential understandings. So with that, I will turn it over to them to tell you a little bit more about the essential understandings and some of the other work that we're doing in North Dakota. So,
great. Thanks, Lucy. So we'll begin to talk about, Sharla and I helped to facilitate it. So it was really nice in North Dakota to be right there on the ground level, talking with the elders, meeting the elders, and facilitating their conversations as they developed the themes that eventually became the 7 essential understandings. This project allows students in schools to learn all their usual academic subjects, but also to gain understanding the traditional ways and concepts that are identified. And our work in large degree is to help teachers navigate those 2 things, to bring together standards, whatever standards they're hired to teach, and the essential understandings, and to do that in a way that is culturally responsive. So those 3 elements really come together. Whatever standards the teacher is teaching, the essential understandings, and then culturally responsive practice. As we had learned from South Dakota, the real power of those essential understandings is in the voices and the faces and the stories of the elders themselves and the culture bearers of the nations, of the tribal nations. And so very early on, we developed the Teachings of Our Elders website. It houses interviews that range from 2 minutes long to maybe 8 minutes long of elders from the state sharing wisdom, sharing story, all of it aligned to those essential understandings. And then we work with teachers to utilize those interviews and bring those into their lessons to develop lesson plans and as well as units for their classrooms and to learn themselves, because that's the first and most important thing, that all of our educators do their own learning from the elders to begin with. Go on to the next slide.
So in North Dakota, one of the things that's been kind of exciting that has happened in recent years is the North Dakota Senate Bill 2304. And this particular bill is something that requires schools to make sure they're including Native American history. And there's some specific things you can read there about when and the kinds of things they need to include. this has given an opportunity or sort of an in with schools to really get them thinking about how could we use the North Dakota Native American essential understandings better? What are some ways that we can bring them in? And as we've been working with schools across the state, lots of schools are doing different kinds of things. They are going through and doing some vertical alignment. How are we making sure to cover all 7 of these in deepening kinds of ways throughout a child's school experience? So this has also given us some places to develop content and to develop. We can't create a curriculum, but we can provide exemplar lessons and lots of different resources for teachers to use. And so this particular part of the website, this can also be found on the Teachings of Our Elders website. This particular part has lots of things for teachers to use so they don't have to try to invent the wheel every time that they begin to use the essential understandings in their practice. So go ahead and go to the next slide.
And I'll just add an important piece of that is obviously the elders from across the state put together the essential understandings, but as teachers implement that, they look to the region, the local, the tribal nations that are closest and the elders that are closest to them, and they have that capacity to really tailor what they're doing. If they live near Turtle Mountain, then they can tailor it to the cultural teachings of that particular nation, and we encourage that. So the North Dakota Native American Needs Assessment and Action Plan was designed to assist administrators and teachers in addressing those needs, to identify those needs through the annual needs assessment survey. The 2022-23 action plan includes a lot of evidence-based strategies and resources with the goal to improve Native American student outcomes. The areas of need that were identified include responsive teaching practices and instruction for all students, promoting social emotional learning, using equitable instructional practices and engaging with the Native American community. That's one thing that the new bill certainly addressed. It ignited a lot of activity in the state, groups getting together and developing and saying, what do we need to develop for our, in particular for our schools in our region? Next slide, please.
So there were several things that we learned from implementing some of the things from the needs assessment. One of the things that we have been continuing to develop are some teams of champions across the state. What we like to think about with that is it's engaging those folks that are in the schools that are ready to move with this, that's sort of our stones that roll, getting them started working together around how does this look in our particular school, in our particular setting. And it's awesome because these are people that are already motivated and excited and inspired to do this work, and they're coming together in teams, and they are sharing with each other the things that they're doing and the things that are working. And what we've noticed is as that happens and as that energy grows, then we start to see some of those folks who maybe weren't as excited about it begin to join in and see, oh, wow, you know, when you do this, you're getting responses and interaction from students who maybe in the past have not been as responsive in the classroom. And so that's been a very exciting thing to see. One of the things that we have really focused on with this work is trying to change hearts, to change practice. So sometimes if a mandate comes along, it can be somewhat, it can go a couple different ways. You know, yes, you may get a little bit more work happening in a certain way or a certain, maybe work that hasn't been done in the past, but is it being done in a good way? And sometimes when something becomes a mandate, it can also become a box to check off. And so we've really been trying to avoid that by encouraging the educators to really become transformed themselves as they work with this content and with these essential understandings. And so occasionally it can become even harmful for someone to just say, well, I guess I have to do this, so I'm going to do this lesson today, and we're going to have this little tie on at the end. And it sends a message to some of our students that it's not real learning, or that it's not as important as other. And what we've been really working with educators on is how to make sure that this content is woven within everything else, that it becomes a way of being in our classrooms, and not something that's simply an add-on. So the makeup of the student body and the faculty can make a big difference in how it's implemented. Some of our schools have almost no Indigenous students in them, and these still need to be implemented there, but it might look a little different than another school which is 100% Indigenous, and maybe even 100% Indigenous instructors. So it can really make a difference depending on what that makeup is. Next slide, please.
Choices that we're making about assessment. Some in North Dakota, as Sharla mentioned, want mandated assessment of the Indian AEUs, and a lot of that is motivated, understandably. They want teeth in it. They want to ensure that this is implemented, and there's a historic lack of trust that is certainly justified. The problem with that is exactly what Sharla was talking about. Putting teeth in something so that you force people who don't want to do it to check off a box quite often can create a worse situation in the classroom. And so we're really trying to win those hearts and minds. The decision not to assess the Indian A as outcomes. One of the other problems that we see as potential is that these cultural pieces become just a separate content in and of themselves. While that might be really valuable in certain contexts for certain purposes, that's also a way to ensure that the implementation of these essential understandings is not transformative at all. It won't transform science. It won't transform our teaching of math. It won't transform our teaching of literature or reading or art or music if we simply relegate the cultural pieces to culture class. Once again, it's just another way of adding it on instead of allowing it to transform the way we do school, and looking at this as an opportunity to be more culturally responsive. Potential to assess teacher implementation of culturally relevant practices. We have the new elders and some educators came together to develop the new North Dakota Indigenous learning principles, which is something that is, I don't know everything about what's happening in every state, but I think it's something that is unique to North Dakota. This is where elders and educators came together to say not what should be taught, but how teaching should happen. What are we talking about when we talk about from an Indigenous perspective, when we talk about learners? What are learners? What is learning from an Indigenous perspective? And so the team came together and developed this wonderful framework for communicating to the state's educators from an Indigenous point of view. This is what learning is. This is what learners are. And that's not just for Indigenous learners, that's for all learners. And so it's a wonderful tool that is just now kind of being implemented at some level because it was written just before COVID hit. And so we kind of hit a bump in the road with that. Classroom level assessment over state level assessment. One of the things that is really important is that it's not that we don't want to assess, it's that the assessments need to be assessments for learning, more focus on formative assessment and more focus on self-assessment with learners, helping learners to say, hey, in what ways have I grown? What ways have I learned? How does this new cultural knowledge that I wasn't aware of previously, how has that helped me? How does that fit into the other things that I'm learning in school? And so the formative assessments that are at the classroom level and that are more low stakes are really where the state is leaning, rather than a high stakes statewide sort of test to see about what content is being, to assess what content is being gained. So, next slide.
This is just a couple of the snapshots of some of the responses from the North Dakota Needs Assessment. And you'll notice 2021, there's big shifts in the data, which we know came from the pandemic and some of the school closures and things like that. But some things to highlight here is that teachers are increasing the amount of integration that they're doing in their classroom with the essential understandings and their whatever curriculum that they do in their instruction. There's also an increase in prioritizing that content, which we think is really exciting to see. There on the other side, the other box, that there's increases in that engagement or connections with Native American culture and community, which has been exciting to see. Of course, we're making up a little bit here from a loss over the 2020 and 2021. But these are all moving in that upward direction as we look at what's been going on with teaching and learners in the state over the last couple of years. Next slide, please.
Closing the achievement gap. In 2012, the NDDPI established a priority to reduce the disparity, that stubborn achievement gap that continues to show up for all Native American students. They have seen progress, and this is a really exciting piece. From 2012 to 2021, 2012, we were at 52% graduation rate. 2021 saw us at 78% graduation rate. This is for Native American students. ACT scores 2020 15.2 versus 2021 15.8. And the NAEP scores, grade 4 reading, really exciting, from 202 in 2019 to 206 in 2022. And so a lot of this is being attributed to this this focus on making our classrooms more culturally responsive, making sure that our Indigenous students are seeing themselves in the curriculum and sensing that they have a place in our schools, not that coming to school is some form of assimilation or some form of operating in a world that I don't understand. That really has played out in some significant changes having to do with the achievement gaps. Next slide.
Could I add to that? Historically, those numbers have been just almost impossible to move. And Lucy could probably speak more to that if there are questions about that. But it has been stagnant for many, many, many years. So this recent movement has been very exciting. So moving on to this, one of the ways that we're trying to work with all of this and provide what's needed for our educators in the state is a learning pathway for teachers. And we call it the team of champions when we get a group together, a cohort that's moving through it, because they are the people who are going to champion this work. We call the pathway responsive practices for all students. And the reason we call it a pathway is because it takes place over a longer period of time, usually about 6 months, maybe a little less or a little more. But over that 6-month period, the educators are experiencing a variety of different kinds of learning opportunities. We begin with the self-reflection, looking at why I am the way I am, how I got here, why I think about certain things the way I do. And we start that with the IDI, which you can see there, the Intercultural Development Inventory. This is an assessment tool that we use with educators to give them a starting point. When I am dealing with difference and I encounter somebody for the first time who's different from me, what are the tools I tend to use? What are the ways I tend to engage with that person? Am I able to connect in meaningful ways? Am I putting out things that create barriers? What are some of those things that I tend to do when I'm dealing with difference? So that IDI, which has been around for about 30 years now and deeply researched, has become a very wonderful tool for us. It gives us a common language to talk about something that's kind of difficult to put into words sometimes. We also go through a course. We had the participants in small groups of 4 or 5 people come together and take a course together. Get together each week for about 4 weeks and engage in learning about culturally responsive practices and the research behind it, which is very helpful in a couple ways. It gives them content that they're learning, but it also gives them this small group interaction where they can begin to think about some of the things they learned about themselves through the IDI, and then how they're beginning to work with some of that information in a small group where they can begin to build trust with one another to share. And so that's been very positive. We also do a book study with them. We have chosen the book My Grandmother's Hands by Resmaa Menakem, and it deals with a variety of things, but one of the central points is trauma and taking a look at our own trauma, as well as trauma in the students we serve and the colleagues we work with. Beginning to understand trauma from a variety of perspectives, whether it be Black body trauma, white body trauma, or blue body trauma, which is military and police. We come together in 5 seminar days where we're face-to-face, and we work with the learning and the things that they've been working on in their small groups and individually. And then we wrap up the pathway with some opportunities for implementing what they've been learning with some coaching and some reflection afterwards. So this has been a really wonderful pathway that we have found to be quite transformative. And Scott, I don't know if you want to say any more about that before we go on. Was there anything else you want to add?
I'll just say this. We had a discussion at the beginning of this pathway before we implemented it for the first time. With Lucy and with Kirsten Baszler, the state superintendent of education, because in light of the development of the SB 2304 and the legislation, a number of Indigenous committees and groups and tribal entities were developing content. And we wanted to be really clear that a big piece of the appropriate work for her office was not developing that content, but to give preparation for how to implement that content. And so, I think understanding who should be doing what sort of work and how we partner in appropriate ways is really important. So this pathway is really all about preparing individual teachers themselves to be ready to navigate difference well, to be aware of what culturally responsive practices look like, to be aware of trauma, the trauma in their students, the trauma of their colleagues, and their own trauma, which is something we almost always ignore in the past, being able to process that in appropriate ways, and then implement something that I've designed with my students and get a little bit of coaching. So we're trying to determine, the best route, what's appropriate for our wonderful Indigenous educators and committees from our tribal nations, what they need to be preparing as representative of their nation, their culture, their language, and what the State Department needs to do to support all of that in a good way. Next slide.
Right. Thank you so much, Lucy, Sharla, and Scott, for the state level perspective and the ways that you're trying to move districts and classrooms from the roles that you hold right now. With that, we're moving on to Hawaii for a school level example of what this looks like in a school leadership position. So, Lonnie, if you're ready.
Right. Au mahalie na pua kai o ke ana I ke kaimimi ki aku o ka maka. Maka no e kumo I loko loko ka na au. Na au ka ikana o na pupuna e. Aloha. Oh yeah. Aloha kako. Aloha e nahua mai oa o ka honua poi poi o wau ho I ke ia o kameha ililani wa iau. Wahi kumu, wahi alakai hoi o ke kula o Samuel Manaya Kalani Kamakau Laboratory Public Charter School. Aia no Iuka I haiku, I kane ohe, I ko olau poko ma ka mokupuni o Oahu. Ai, I ka pai aina o Hawaii. Aloha kako. My name is Kamaha'ililani Waiao, and I'm super stoked and honored to join you today and share a little bit about my kula and some of the stuff, some of the magic we're doing at Kamako. Kamako is a, next slide, please. Kamako wears multiple hats. We are a Hawaiian medium school. We're a Hawaiian immersion school. We're also a lab school under Kahakaula o Ke'elikolani, which is the College of Hawaiian Language out of the University of Hawaii at Hilo. And we are a Hawaiian focused charter school. Charters in Hawaii and actually all schools in Hawaii operate a little bit differently from the rest of from all the schools on the continent, in that all of Hawaii Pai'aina, the whole state, has one Department of Education, yeah, and so it's one hui that services the whole archipelago of Hawaii. And then within that, to the side, the cousins of the Department of Education are the charter schools, and there are 31 charter schools. 17 of those 31 charter schools are Hawaiian focused charter schools, which are also public schools. 6 of those 17 are Hawaiian language immersion schools. The 17 Hawaiian focused charter schools service just shy of 5,000 haumana from pre-K to 12, and then 81% of our student population at the Hawaiian focused charter schools are of part Hawaiian descent. So on the map, you'll see that this is Hawaii, and the school I'm going to talk about, our little school, is on Oahu, which is where the capital is. I, however, am currently on the island way at the far right of the, I'm doing a staycation, but also working from Waiakeauka in Hawaii, on Hawaii Mokupuni. So aloha kako. Next slide. E kanoa, mahalo. All right, so a little bit about Hawaiian focused charter schools and a lot of similar curricular elements that kind of make us ohana. Yeah, all of our schools have either Olelo Hawaii as the main medium of delivery of education, or offer and require Olelo Hawaii as a set of classes for their students. Also, lots of focus on place-based, Aina focus, self-determination and sovereignty, or practices of sovereignty, self-determination, advocacy for our people, advocacy for the way in which we want to stake our claim in reclaiming education for us as Native practitioners, and Native educators and Native students as well. It's also very much open to ensuring integration of spiritual and genealogical connections for all of our families and our students in our schools. Heavy focus on protocol as well as ceremony, and navigation and canoe culture. You'll see this quote to the right of the slide is by Dr. Noelani Goodyear Ka'opua. The work of educators reclaiming public K-12 education as a form of Hawaiian self-determination and sovereign practice is really integral in the Hawaiian focused charters, in the charter school movement, and in the Hawaiian focused charter school movement. It's an opportunity to kind of move the state forward and push and push and push. And we know that we're able to do that, do a lot of that pushing because we are blessed to be the younger siblings of the Kulakaya Puni movement, or the Hawaiian language, Hawaiian immersion school movement, which is almost 40 years old at this point. And so we are really blessed and honored to benefit and holomua and make big strides because of the work of the Kaiapuni schools, which are DOE schools, as well as the private Hawaiian language preschools, led mostly by the Ahapuna Leo. And so we know that charter schools in Hawaii and Hawaiian focused charter schools in Hawaii really do benefit from that opportunity or from the hard works of our kua'ana, of our elder siblings who've been fighting the fight. And so we're the next gen. Next slide, Kewaolu. Mahalo e kanoa. And so a little bit about my kula. Ke kula o Kamako, because it's a mouthful when you say the whole name. But I just want to point out, it's really Hawaiian to have your school name, to have the name school or the word school in your name 2 times, because duplication, that's a very Hawaiian thing. Yeah, we really like to do that in our language. Our school is 23 years old, and so we're still learning and growing as a papahana. Our school's mission is to foster success for all members of our learning community by providing culturally healthy and responsive learning environments for our keiki and our OPO. We are a pre-K-12 school located in the uplands of Haiku on the Ko'olaupoko side, so we're on the nice, cool, wet side of Oahu. Yeah, we're very small. We have 152 students enrolled from pre-K to 12, and we are very elementary heavy. And I think you'll find that to be true for most immersion schools and most Hawaiian focused charter schools. Next slide. Okay, so assessment, right? That's what we're here to wala'au and have some cool discussion about. And so the idea of assessment, what it looks like, what our in-house assessment looks like at Kamako, really stems from some of our, we were unhappy with what was happening at the state level. All the immersion schools were unhappy with what was happening at the state level. And looking for ways to, before the state was able to make some moves on attaining a waiver, we were really looking for, okay, how do we, in the meantime, because a lot of the PDKIA sometimes is, it's a long wait, yeah, to get assessment created by a state system or a federal system. And then for them to recognize that, yes, it should be created, originally developed in the Hawaiian language, which is the language of instruction and all of those things. But sometimes you don't have the time. You don't have the time to wait for the state to put all that together, get their team, and since then they've built a fabulous team. But the waiting period was a little bit getting on our nerves at Kamako. And so we couldn't handle it. We were just like chomping at the bit, because we are not afraid of assessment, and we are not afraid of showing where we are and figuring out where we are in our baseline, how do we make improvements. And we felt really strongly like, okay, well, we could possibly work faster and more diligently if we created something in-house, because in the meantime, while we're waiting for the state to holomua and make progress in creating an assessment that would be kupono for all of our Hawaiian language learners, we didn't want to be left bullhead, right? We didn't want to have nothing in our hands, and we wanted to exercise our educational sovereignty. And so we went ahead and we did that. And we worked really hard with, we started in school year 2007, 2008, and worked really hard with some well-noted, really beautiful humans, Dr. Kathy Au and Dr. Alice Kawakami, who helped us to kind of look at, okay, well, what is it that we want to assess? How do we want to assess it? How do we make sure it's being created at our school level? And it's very much a Kamako assessment, right? It's something that is created in the Hawaiian language and also assesses all of the other beautiful gems that make us Kamako. And so we started to work on that, modeled after the School Rise Hawaii model, and really looked at how do we create and how do we identify just in-house what are our goals and what are our benchmarks for our own kiddos in the areas of reading and math, which is where we started. And, you know, back then we thought we'd get a 3-year grant, we'd make it happen. Yeah, we can pump this out in 3 years. No, you cannot. Not if you want a quality product. You can definitely pump out a draft in 3 years and start to pilot it and in-house. And then that's when you learn a lot about who you are as a school and what you stand for, and how much you want to, how much you can decolonize, right, ourselves as leaders, kind of, and as educators, kind of like what Scott was talking about earlier, that mana'o about, ooh, we had to or humble ourselves and be able to really look at what we were doing and aligning and staircasing everything that we're doing at Kamako from pre-K to 12. And so that's what we did. Took us eons. We're still working at it. And then we wanted to make sure, so we do the pre-K to 4, all of that assessment is in Hawaiian language, and assessing their reading in Hawaiian and their math also in Hawaiian. And then all of the work from grades 5 through 12, we doubled up, and we wanted to assess how well our students read in Hawaiian, and then a completely second test on how well do our students read and do math in English, right? And so trying to assess all of these pieces. And so that's 5 to 12. And so we've worked really hard, and we roll those assessments out 3 times a year, and we get some snapshots, and then we do a really big piece of kind of the opportunity to kalailai, and I'm blanking out on kalailai in English. What is kalailai in English? Analyze. Mahalo. It'll come. I'm not in full-on vacation mode. It's coming. I analyze really all of the works and what our kids are doing, and are they really reaching the benchmark, which is the end of year goal, right? The end of year 7th grade goal, or is the 7th grader reaching it? And so once we take our baseline, we go ahead and we meet, and we have a second pair of eyes. So we have another teacher who scores, who does blind scoring of all of those assessments. And so it just really takes so much time. And that was something that we really had to, as administrators, we really had to make sure we always have time in the schedule, and we always have space in the budget to allow for pull-out opportunities and get a sub for the day, so that the kumu, so that the teacher can go ahead and do all these extra pieces, right? Because we don't want you doing it at home later on. We want to give you time while you're fresh and your brain is working. And then opportunities, and then hold each other accountable, and we do school-wide presentations after each assessment period. And then after the gallery walks and sharing of what our scores are looking like, and then opportunities to analyze what the scores are saying. And then, okay, now we're going to do the next set is, what are we going to do different to our instruction in the next 3 months before we assess these kids again in December? Yeah. And so really being diligent as administrators to make sure we are carving out that time. We don't forget about it. We have opportunities to support our teachers and support our learners in between all of these assessment periods. And so we do a baseline, we do a mid-year, and then we do an end of year, and really force our kumu and force ourselves, really, because as an administrator, I also teach, because that's just how we roll in Native communities. You don't have enough people, and so okay, hold on, let me put on my teacher hat, and really look at what are we doing in the middle, right? So we're not just giving straight out assessments 3 times a year. We're actively working in this middle kind of valley area, yeah, to make sure we're putting energy and mana and aloha on all those things so that we can push haumana and learn to differentiate in the areas that the data reveals to us, right? Some of the interesting things that we're seeing is we've recently in the last 3 years added a writing assessment to that. And that's been super interesting because the rubrics, you know, our teachers from 5th to 12th grade are really whole, deserve a second paycheck, like for real kind, are doing some magic because we're realizing that, okay, what a wonderful piece of writing looks like in English is very different from what it looks like in Hawaiian, simply because the English literary devices that you're teaching and that the kiddos are using in the English written paper is going to be very different from what it looks like when you consider ethno-literary devices in Hawaiian language. And then do our students have deft command of all of that, and can they swim easily between both and do that to the caliber that we've set forth as a school. And then, because if that wasn't enough, we also 3 years ago, same time, we implemented the writing piece to our in-house Kawai Hapai Kamakau assessment. We also added an oral proficiency strand, because we realized our kids can speak, right? But what is the quality level of their speaking? They're writing more beautifully than they're speaking. And so as Hawaiian, and I'm sure with all of your languages as well, is a living language. And if we're not actively working to clean up the language levels of our students, as well as our teachers and our staff on campus and our admin, and if we're not constantly assessing the quality and the proficiency of the oral language, then we're doing ourselves a disservice. And all we're doing is really creating a bunch of Hawaiian language writers and Hawaiian language readers. But we really need Hawaiian language speakers as well, right? And so we've added that piece because, you know, we wanted more responsibility and more kuleana. But those pieces are working really well. And we've been able, Kalamai, I'm gonna jump through. One of the other, thank you for this slide, Kanoa. I love it, Kanoa. You just take me back to the ranch, mahalo nui. We're also really blessed to work alongside with our sister charter school, our sister Hawaiian focused charter schools, and have worked really hard since 2013 to create culturally relevant assessment initiative, which is called the Kupu Kupu framework. And that really looks at has a really valuable piece, the most valuable piece inside of that Kupu Kupu framework, which is the culturally relevant assessment initiative, is the cultural competency assessment. And so really looking at protocols and ceremony. And are we just speeding through the chant and the incantation because we gotta, Kumu said circle up, so let's do piko, na, 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 you know? Or are we really aligning all of our piko, and are we opening ourselves and being able to communicate with the elements and with our ancestors in the ways that we need to, versus just rote chanting or you know, that kind. And you can tell when a kid's doing it for real, and when he's feeling it, and when he's just na na na, you know, it's a reciting or mimicking. And so that's a piece we've been working together with our fellow Hawaiian Focused Charter School Network friends and sister schools. And then we've been real, we've taken well, I feel like we've participated 100% in the Kaiapuni assessment for educational outcomes called the KAEL, which is a state level standardized assessment project, which is, you know, which is what we were waiting for back in 2007, 2008, right? And so has been developed. We served multiple times on and sent teachers and educators to work alongside and work with them in creating items. And then we've always volunteered to be a pilot school. Please send it to us. We want to roll it out. We want to check it out, you know, because we're, like I said, we're not afraid of assessment. Culturally, that's a very culturally appropriate thing. Assessment is called ho'ike, right? And it's it's really, you know, traditionally that's authentic assessment, right? You have food for tomorrow. You know how to cook, okay, right? And are the elders and the kupuna and the gods listening to you? Are things coming out good? Okay, then your ceremonial assessment is my kai. You pass. And so, yeah, so that's been really awesome to work with that office, the Ka'eo office and their team, who has been really, really instrumental in pushing, helping us further that push. And so we've really been appreciative of that relationship. And then these are some policies. I'm not going to jump into them because you can read them, but these are some of the current policies at the state level, introduced in 2006, as well as 2015, and really looking at how to, like all policies, super awesome intent, sometimes not enough support at the different levels, whether that's support in capacity, or if that's support in funding, right? Or support in true sovereignty, the ability to truly make sovereign decisions on the way we want to push our schools forward, or push our school forward and our hui of sister schools. Oh yeah, next slide, Kanoa. Reflecting on our school assessment system journey. Oh yeah, okay, so what's really awesome about the in-house assessment we've been doing at Kamukau is 7 years ago, we pushed really hard at the Charter Commission to get the Charter Commission to allow our in-house assessment of Hawaiian language. Excuse me, that was lunch. It was in-house assessment of Hawaiian language reading to be used in place of, or no, I'm so sorry, in addition to all the other state assessments that we take. And so the Charter Commission has agreed and given it the weight value of 25% of our score as a school, which determines our contract, right? Are we eligible to remain and continue to operate as a charter school in the state of Hawaii? And so that's the currently we're the only school that has that at the 25% level. There are other charters who were able to turn around and use their own assessments, their in-house assessments at 15 and 20% weight value in their scoring. But we have it at 25%. And so that's a real testament to, just a lot of that huli kalima ilalo and work hard and get our stuff done, and then able to use that to directly affect and our status as a kula. And so we've been really stoked about that opportunity, and we'll continue to look and continue to work with our sister Hawaiian focused charter schools, as well as Ka'eo, and that hui that is continuing to engage and ho'i kaika and strengthen and refine the state assessment in Olelo, Hawaii. I think that might be all I have. Kanoa, any other slides? That's me, huh? All right, mahalo nui. Aloha kako.
Yeah. Mahalo nui aloha to all of our presenters today. Great information shared. We are almost at the top of our hour and a half webinar, so we don't have as much time for our Q&A session as we were planning for. So we welcome anyone in the audience. Please add your questions to the chat. That is definitely something that we can coordinate following this webinar to provide a list of the Q&A with the materials for this. Yeah, maybe we did have one question in the chat about Lani, at Kamukau, are you measuring oral proficiency in both Hawaiian language and in English?
No, just when. I don't need to know how well they can speak English. There's many other that, you know, the once they leave our campus or once they leave their family's compound, right? They get assessed on English all the time as they're overwhelmed by English. And so, yeah, no. I wonder if I should. No. That would be interesting though. That would be a smart piece to add eventually, probably if we had capacity, but not currently. No, thank you for that, Nino.
I think one common thing that we've heard from all of the presenters today is just the time that it takes for these things to develop and roll out, and the many hands behind it. And then as Lonnie, you shared like the generations building on each other, the work going for, and everyone is coming in at different starting points. So thank you so much for all of our presenters sharing kind of where they're at in their systems and how you're thinking about assessments at this time and what you're thinking going forward. To close this out, I wanted to share a preview of a new infographic that REL Pacific is going to be coming out with in the next month or two. It's in the final stages of the development. The title is Culturally Responsive Assessments for Indigenous Students. It highlights many of the things that were shared today in the presentations, but we hope that this document can serve as discussion starting points for teachers or for school leaders who are looking to make their assessments in their systems more culturally responsive. So it's not a tool to help solve issues, but to start the conversations and figure out what is the best starting place for your school and your context. Our slides will be posted to the REL Pacific website in a couple weeks following this webinar. My colleague will be sharing a link to the survey in the feedback survey. We really would appreciate hearing what you thought about today's panel presentations, and that survey link will also be coming out in a follow-up email. And with that, just like to say thank you again to everyone for joining. Feel free to reach out to REL Pacific with any future further questions, and be on the lookout for the resources from this webinar and beyond. So have a great rest of your week, everyone.
Thank you.